Good day. This is the Journey of Water, Tourism and Water Conservation. I'm Paulo Pagaduan, Project Manager for WWF-Philippines. Water is life. As far as we know, there cannot be life without water. In fact, just recently, NASA sent another probe to Mars looking for life. And that's because recently, in their previous mission, they found evidence of water on Mars. And not just any form of water. It has to be water in liquid form because as far as we know, there cannot be life without water. Water is for us and for all, not just those living underwater, but also living above water, as well as nature itself, including those that are both living and non-living. Since the pandemic started, we've been receiving a lot of advice from our experts to keep washing our hands. And this is very important because it's our primary defense against spreading the disease, COVID-19. But have any of you ever stopped and wondered how much water are we actually using in that 20 seconds of washing our hands? In an experiment at our house during the water crisis in 2018, I measured how much water we'll be using if we keep the water running as we lather our hands with soap as prescribed by our experts. And within 20 seconds, we could easily use up more than 1.5 liters of water. And that is water generally wasted while we're soaping our hands and we're just letting the faucet flow. So that's how much water we use in 20 seconds. And take note that this was during the crisis in Metro Manila, the water crisis in Metro Manila in 2018, where we had a lot less pressure than what we used to have before the crisis. But then again, have any of you ever wondered where the water is coming from? When we ask people in Metro Manila, they kept saying that they get their water from the faucet. Where do you get your water? It's a Ipo, it's a faucet. And that's quite understandable for many people who live in the cities who don't really bother how to understand where the water is coming from. But in general, water does not come from the faucet. In fact, it comes from somewhere way, way farther than the faucet. As a little review, this is the water cycle as discussed by NASA. Because of the heat of the sun, which heats up our oceans and our water bodies, water eventually evaporates and then condenses into clouds. And as the clouds get heavier, they eventually fall back to Earth as snow or rain or sleet. And some of these waters eventually flow through the rocks and the soil and then end up in our underground in the water table, which becomes groundwater. But then again, some of the waters eventually flow above the surface, which is then called surface water, collected in our lakes or our rivers, which eventually flow back out into the sea again, completing the cycle. So it's clear that the water in general is coming from nature because of the water cycle and not just because of a faucet. So more specifically, for Metro Manila, about 40 kilometers northeast of Metro Manila, they get the water from this watershed. It's Angat and the Ipo Watershed. In the Ipo Watershed in particular are two dams which were created to help convey the water from these watersheds to where we need them the most. The Angat Dam was created as a hydropower dam, and the Ipo Dam was created specifically to provide water for Metro Manila. And now Metro Manila gets 96% of its water from the Ipo Dam, which is then channeled to the La Mesa Dam, which is where our concessionaires, Manila Water and Maynilad, eventually distribute it to the population. So when you look at the Ipo watershed from a distance, it may look quite okay. It looks green. But when we go down, and I mean we go down to the site, we could see that a lot of the areas are not actually forests, but have been converted into farms. Some even have the marks of previous illegal activities such as kaingin and other illegal timber poaching. And some areas are actually bare rock or soil because of the years of overexploitation and degradation that has been going on in the watershed. So this is sort of a picture of the status of where our water comes from, and that's why we have to do something about it if we want water conveyed to where we are. Now that we know that water actually comes from nature, we must also understand that it takes a lot for that water to be captured, eventually cleaned to our specific purposes. And take note that there's more than one use for water. Not all water need to be potable or at a level that's safe for drinking. And then eventually it needs to be conveyed to where we need it the most. So this is why most people think that the faucet is the source of the water, because every day when we turn on the faucet, we get the water. But we don't really think about the process involved in how to get that water from nature to our faucets in our houses. And then again, after using it, we must always remember, specifically for industries, is that after using it, it has to go through a similar process, maybe even a more intense process of cleaning before we put it back out into nature. And this is the case for a lot of the tourism facilities, particularly in Boracay, where recently they were shut down due to the poor water quality in the area, which was basically mainly about most of the establishments not following this reverse process where you have to process the dirty water you use before you pump it out back into the sea or into the ground. So, but when we talk about water management, we often just talk about the supply side. Oh no, we need more water. We have a crisis. We need more water. Sometimes these solutions will entail building large infrastructures that may hamper or do irreparable damage to the environment. And it's because we only focus on the supply side of the issue. But actually, we have to focus on both sides of the coin. It's both supply and demand. So, in particular, at the height of the water crisis in Metro Manila, this was the average consumption for a typical middle class family in the eastern part of Metro Manila, which was which suffered the most at 2018 water crisis in Metro Manila. And believe it or not, this is 200 liters. So can you imagine that each individual in Metro Manila, East Side, middle class and above, we're using 200 liters per day per person? It may be hard to believe, but you can check your water bills if you're in Metro Manila. The average monthly consumption is about 30 cubic meters, so that's divided by 30 days, so that's 1 cubic meter per day. 1,000 liters divided by 5 average household member. So that's roughly 200 liters a day. The national average is about 105. The World Health Organization pegged the water needed for an individual to live a decent life is at 57 to 60 liters per day. Rural areas only use about 80 liters per day per person. Sometimes, actually more often than not, tourism facilities use a lot more than this because we tend to use a lot more water as for our relaxation, for many of our activities in tourism facilities. So this average may be a lot higher. So just to give you an idea of how much water we're talking about in our daily lives. So this is a typical glass. On the average, it's about 200 ml. Our famous tabo or dipper is about 1,000 ml. Yes, surprising, it's 1 liter, no? But the average size is about 1 liter. The average balde is about 20 liters. By the way, if you use this type of pail, be sure that it's cleaned properly because it used to store chemicals that may be harmful to humans. And this is a cubic meter or 1,000 liters. So many of the resort I've seen recently have these part of their rainwater collection system. But essentially, this is a cubic meter or 1,000 liters. And for reference, this is 30 cubic meters or 30,000 liters, which is the average household consumption in Metro Manila East Side during the crisis. And again, if you have a swimming pool, an Olympic-sized swimming pool is essentially 2,500 cubic meters. So this is just for reference so that you know how much water is which. So when we talk about water demand management, the other side of the coin, these are some of the things that we have to look into to ensure that we're using the water properly. First of all, we need to talk about water loss reduction. This is primarily talking about leaks. We have to be sure that we don't have leaks. It should be as unacceptable for a faucet to leak as the way we look at air pollution from a chimney or even plastic waste in the sea. A dripping faucet should not be overlooked, especially in a very large facility. The next is pressure management. The more pressure you use in the system, the more water flows out of that faucet per second. So there are prescribed pressure for each system, but sanitation-wise, you have to maintain a certain pressure so that you can avoid contaminants from entering the pipes in case there are some leakages. This is dictated by law or by governing bodies in the area. But essentially, we don't need water to the water from our system to reach the, let's say, the third floor or the fourth floor without any additional pumping mechanism involved. If you need to raise the water to that level, you need to have a separate system pumping the water up and not rely on the general water system from the utility. And then the next is water reuse. This is very simple, where as much as possible, the water that we use for some functions is reused for other purposes that do not require a very high water quality. For example, we can use it to water our green areas for irrigation. Then the most famous recommendation always is rainwater harvesting. One, it's free. It's very cheap to integrate into a system. We even have a program working with public schools where we just put a drum, the blue drum earlier, and then connect it to the gutter system of the building, and then just put a cover and put a faucet or even just another tabo to get the water. So this can augment the water supply of the area. But unfortunately, it would depend on the size of your area or your roof and the amount of water you're using in the facility as well. So this is more of an augmentation rather than a complete replacement. The next is water efficient fixtures. So I'll go into this a bit more later. Then there's also water conservation. This is the part where we ask people to catch all the water they use for shampooing their hair, and then you can later use it to flush the toilet, or the water you use for your washing machine can be used to clean the car. So these are some of the these are the tips on how to conserve water. And at least at this part, we've been talking about this a lot, but we have to figure out how much of that water is actually being saved in the long run. And then we go to the last one. Maybe this is the least popular one, is that water use restriction. We can actually restrict some uses of water for specifically in areas where water is very scarce. For example, if there's a water crisis or we know that the area is water stressed, maybe we can ban. Common examples that from our discussions are swimming pools and golf courses in water stressed areas, for example. So we can restrict those. But again, that's more towards the end of the spectrum of what we need to do on the side of water demand management. But for the tourism industry, I think one of the simplest recommendation in terms of water use restriction related to water efficient fixtures is that simply avoid putting a bathtub. I know that a bathtub is a requirement to get a 5-star rating, or that a lot of people like having bathtubs or jacuzzis. But if you're in a water-stressed area, that's not really a very reasonable facility because it really wastes a lot of water. So these are the things that can be restricted depending on your assessment of your needs in the area. If you're as young as me, we used to have the very big toilet tanks. They were wider than my shoulders, and apparently they were about 18 liters per flush. But since 1992, we've been getting the smaller versions that are now down to 6 liters. But now, the more efficient toilet tanks can be about 4 liters per flush. So imagine that without changing the habit, each of your client, they still push the plunger, but now they'll be using practically 1/5 the water flushing by simply installing a more water efficient toilet tank or toilet unit. Another one is about choosing the better brands which have the better water efficiency. Unfortunately, in the Philippines, we don't have a system on rating how efficient appliance is with regards to water. We have it for electricity. We call it the EER, Energy Efficiency Rating. And we know that the bigger the number, the better in savings. So we may spend more initially, but we know down the line that we'll be saving a lot more because it's using less electricity. The funny thing is, when we buy a washing machine, for example, we still look at the EER, the energy efficiency rating, but we don't look at the water rating. How many liters of water is used per wash, per load of that washing machine? Or how about this faucet or this shower head? How much liters of water is flowing out of it per minute, for example? So these are some of the the simple changes that one can make in choosing what fixtures that you put in your house or in your facility with regards to water. So there's a group pushing for this now. But then again, even without the rating, You can check online because the same water fixtures that we use here are sold in other countries which do require water rating. So you can check their rating in that country so you can compare and choose the better product. And now there's an even simpler solution where you can just install a nozzle which can, by depending on the model or the design, can cut water usage by 98%. And this is just a nozzle that you can fit into your faucets in your facility, which would require very little infrastructure need. You just plug it in as long as it's compatible with this particular nozzle. And by just changing that water fixture, by adding this little attachment, you can save up to 98% water because we don't need the big flushing water in the first place. This mode is the free flowing, but when you use it in this mode where the water is actually sprayed or atomized and spread over a larger area, you can use less water without changing the habit of the user much. So unfortunately, this particular design is not yet, I think it's not yet available here, and it's quite expensive. But then again, if you compute it down the line, that this can save 98% of your water from the faucet just by installing this small device. Okay, so I'm not promoting this particular design or anything, but saying that these flow restrictors and these atomizers that make the water more cover a larger area are generally low cost investments that you can put into your kitchen, and which is actually better in, let's say, washing your dishes because they spread over a larger surface area. And then again, if you're still building your facility, it would be a good idea to look at having green infrastructure installed into your building, because in general, all our water source from the water supply utility is in the same quality, which is potable. You can drink it from the faucet by law. But some of these uses, like the toilet, do not actually require potable water. And the water from these systems, like the kitchen sink and the toilet, are called black water, which should, again, by law, be treated in a septic tank, which is, of course, must comply with the requirements by law, before it gets recharged or pumped back out into nature. But then again, some of the uses in our houses, like the bathroom sink or the shower, the water we use for that is not generally as dirty as the ones used by the toilet and the kitchen sink. So these are termed gray water. And gray water, along with storm water, which we can collect from our drainage systems, can be collected in an underground tank or facility, and with very little treatment can be filtered into non-potable water. This non-potable water tank can then be used to, let's say, irrigate our green areas, and also it can be used to flush our toilets, which again do not require water quality level. So in a way, we're saving the use of the potable water by reusing the filtered water, which is not safe for drinking. This is called dual piping. So it's quite difficult for facilities that have already been built. But if you're just starting to build your facility, it would be very useful to have this kind of system where you have gray water and potable water systems. We could also collect rainwater from our roofs and then funnel it down to another tank, a separate tank. With very little treatment, we can filter that back as potable water, because in general, rainwater is a lot cleaner. And then this line can then be used again for our kitchen sink or shower, or even other purposes that might require potable water. It's also ideal to have green infrastructure within your facilities where water is also allowed to recharge back into nature on its own, as long as it's just rainwater or the water from your lawn. So this is an example of an ideal net zero water building. And this is actually incorporated in our green building code. But then again, it's not mandatory for all new buildings, so only of a certain size. But this is something that you would want to keep in mind when you're trying to build your facility. You can even do it retroactively, but it might cost you a bit more to install dual pipings in your built-up facility. when we talk about water management, what we're actually trying to manage are the risks associated with water. Most of you are familiar with the physical risk. This is the risk of not having enough water, not having enough clean water, or maybe having too much water in the case of flooding. But oftentimes we do not talk about regulatory risk, which was what happened to Boracay. You had water, but regulations stopped you. No matter if you were a model facility in Boracay, but everybody wasn't playing by the same rules. Everybody was shut down. This is hardly talked about in many industries, in particular for the tourism industry. But regulatory water risk is really something that you should consider. And then also, there's a reputational risk that similar to what happened to Boracay. Fortunately, the cesspool tag didn't stick. But imagine if you were a water company where there's a rumor going around that your water has cockroaches or something that might affect the reputation of your company or your facility. So these are some of the things that we need to talk about when talking about water management. Fortunately, we have developed a tool called the water risk filter where we explore, assess, and then value and then respond to these risks associated with your business. So you can check out our website. It's the waterriskfilter.panda.org for more information. This is a free tool. So anybody can just go to the site, create your own account, and then you can easily assess on your own how much risks you have for water, physical, reputational, regulatory. And then it even provides you with simple tips on how to respond or even to value these issues or risks associated with your business. But given the time limit for today, if you are interested in learning more about the water risk filter, you can just call us up and then we'd be happy to assist you more with assessing your water risks for your business. Many would think that we do this because we want to save the panda, we want to save the trees or the butandings or the eagles. But it's not really about saving wildlife or the panda or nature in general. It's actually about saving the humans because we know that everything we need actually comes from nature. Water comes from nature. And as far as we know, water is life. Without water, there can be no life. So we're not doing it because the panda is cute, although it is cute. No? Personally, I'm doing it for my son. This is Pax, about 2 years old. This is him now singing the national anthem in his online schooling. A very difficult situation. But I'm doing this for the next generation, for my kid. And that's the reason why WWF is working to help conserve nature. It's because we want a future where our children still enjoy the things that we enjoy now. So, again, I'm Paulo Pagaduan and I'm a conservationist for WWF. I hope someday you join us in our mission as well. So, thank you very much. And in the pandemic, let's keep our distance so that we can be together again. Stay at home. And thank you very much. Please follow us on our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and check out our website on wwf.org.ph. Thank you very much.